In the glittering ballroom of Ashford Hall, a priceless diamond bracelet vanishes during a grand gala, plunging the night into mystery. Was it Lady Beatrice, the proud hostess betrayed by her own carelessness? Clara, the ambitious fiancée, eyeing more than love? Percival Reed, the desperate jeweller tempted by his own creation? Or Ellen, the fearful maid, hiding a dark secret? Join Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a web of pride, greed and desperation in a quaint English village, where every glance and whisper holds the key to the truth. In just 30 seconds, dive into a tale of elegance and intrigue, where no one is quite what they seem. Chapter 1. The Gala at Ashford Hall. The grand ballroom of Ashford Hall glowed with a soft golden light, its chandeliers casting intricate patterns across the polished oak floor. The air was thick with the scent of roses and the hum of polite conversation, punctuated by the delicate clink of champagne flutes. Lady Beatrice Ashford, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk, glided through the crowd, her diamond bracelet sparkling with every turn of her wrist. The gala, held to celebrate the engagement of her niece, Clara Langston, to the dashing financier, Henry Langston, had drawn the county's elite. Among them, tucked unobtrusively in a velvet armchair near the fireplace, sat Miss Jane Marple, her sharp eyes taking in every detail from beneath her unassuming lace cap. Miss Marple, visiting her old friend Mrs. Dolly Bantry in the nearby village of St. Mary Mead, had been invited as a courtesy. She was not one for grand parties, preferring the quiet of her garden or the gossip of her village, but she accepted such invitations with a certain curiosity. People, she often thought, revealed themselves most clearly when they believed themselves unobserved. And so, she watched. There was Clara, radiant in sapphire blue, her laughter a touch too bright as she clung to Henry's arm. There was Mr. Percival Reed, the jeweller, a wiry man with a meticulous air, adjusting his spectacles as he spoke to a portly gentleman. And there was Ellen Carter, the new maid, moving like a shadow among the guests, her tray of canapés held with a precision that belied her nervous glances. The bracelet, Miss Marple noted, was the evening's centrepiece. Lady Beatrice, with her characteristic flair, had made sure of that. "Clara, my dear, come see it properly," she called, raising her wrist so the diamonds caught the light, scattering prisms across the room. The bracelet, an Ashford family heirloom recently reset by Reed with new stones, was a marvel. 20 flawless diamonds set in white gold, each catching the chandelier's glow like a tiny star. "It's been in the family for generations," Beatrice said, her voice carrying to the nearby guests who murmured their admiration. "Mr. Reed has outdone himself." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her lap, a scarf taking shape beneath her deft fingers. She observed Clara's eager nod, the way her eyes lingered on the bracelet before returning to Henry. She noted Reed's faint flush of pride, quickly masked by a professional nod. And she saw Ellen pause, just for a moment, her tray dipping slightly as she stared at the glittering jewels. People are so careless with their treasures, Miss Marple thought, her lips curving faintly. As the evening wore on, the string quartet shifted to a waltz, and couples took to the floor. Beatrice danced with Colonel Bantry, her bracelet flashing with each step. Clara and Henry twirled nearby, their engagement the talk of the room. Reed retreated to a corner, deep in conversation with a guest Miss Marple recognized as Mr. Grayson, a local landowner with a penchant for collecting gems. Ellen continued her rounds, her face pale under the gaslight, her movements swift but deliberate. Miss Marple's eyes followed her, noting the way her apron pocket bulged slightly, though it might have been a trick of the light. It was nearing midnight when the mood shifted. The music softened, and guests began to gather their wraps. Beatrice, standing by the grand staircase, raised her wrist to adjust her shawl, and froze. "My bracelet!" she gasped, her voice cutting through the chatter. "It's gone." The room stilled. Guests turned, their faces a mix of shock and curiosity. Clara rushed to her aunt's side, Henry close behind. Reed pushed through the crowd, his spectacles glinting. Ellen, clearing a tray of empty glasses, nearly dropped it, her eyes wide. Inspector Hargreaves was summoned from the village, but by the time he arrived, the guests had searched the ballroom, the drawing room, even the terrace where some had strolled. The bracelet was nowhere to be found. Beatrice, pale but composed, insisted she'd felt it on her wrist during her last dance. "It must have been stolen," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. The word hung heavy, and eyes darted from face to face. Miss Marple, still in her armchair, folded her knitting and rose. "Dear me," she said softly, almost to herself, "how very inconvenient." But her eyes were bright, and her mind was already turning over the evening's events, like a puzzle whose pieces were only just beginning to take shape. Chapter 2. The Initial Inquiry. The morning after the gala at Ashford Hall dawned crisp and clear, with a faint mist lingering over the lawns. The grandeur of the previous evening had given way to a subdued atmosphere, as if the very walls of the great house were holding their breath. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the breakfast room of her friend Mrs. Dolly Bantry's cottage in St. Mary Mead, sipped her tea and listened, as Dolly recounted the villagers' early gossip about the theft. "It's all anyone can talk about," Dolly said, her eyes bright with the thrill of scandal. "A diamond bracelet vanished into thin air. They're saying it's worth a king's ransom." Miss Marple smiled, faintly, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically in her lap. "People do love a mystery," she remarked, "but it's the small details that matter most, Dolly. A bracelet doesn't simply vanish. It's taken, or lost, or hidden." Her tone was mild, but her mind was already sifting through the events of the gala, cataloguing the faces, the gestures, the fleeting glances she had observed. When a note arrived from Lady Beatrice Ashford, requesting her presence at the hall to assist with a delicate matter, Miss Marple was not surprised. She folded her knitting, donned her best hat, and set off, her curiosity as sharp as ever. Ashford Hall was a hive of quiet activity when she arrived. Servants moved with hushed efficiency, their usual chatter stifled by the weight of the theft. Lady Beatrice, still elegant despite the strain in her eyes, greeted Miss Marple in the morning room. "You've a way of seeing things, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low. "Inspector Hargreaves is competent, but, well, you understand people." Miss Marple inclined her head, accepting the compliment with her usual modesty. "I only observe, Lady Beatrice," she said. "People are not so different, whether in a village or a grand hall." Inspector Hargreaves, a sturdy man with a bristling moustache and a no-nonsense air, was already at work in the library, where a makeshift inquiry had been set up. His notebook lay open on a mahogany table, and his pen scratched steadily, as he questioned the 4 individuals most closely tied to the bracelet's disappearance. Lady Beatrice herself, her niece Clara Langston, the jeweller Percival Reed, and the maid Ellen Carter. Miss Marple settled into a high-backed chair in the corner. Her knitting resumed, her presence so unassuming that she might have been part of the furniture. But her eyes missed nothing, and her ears caught every inflection. Hargreaves began with Lady Beatrice, who sat erect, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wore the bracelet all evening," she declared, her voice firm despite the faint tremor beneath it. "It was on my wrist during my dance with Colonel Bantry, and I felt its weight even as I bid farewell to the first guests. I didn't remove it, Inspector, not once." Her eyes flicked to Miss Marple, as if seeking confirmation, but Miss Marple's needles continued their steady rhythm, her expression one of polite attention. Hargreaves pressed gently. "Could it have slipped off, Lady Ashford? A faulty clasp, perhaps." Beatrice's lips tightened. "Impossible. Mr. Reed inspected it only last week. The clasp was perfect." She described showing the bracelet to Clara during the gala, her pride in the heirloom evident. "It's not just the diamonds," she said, echoing her words from the previous night. "It's a piece of my family's history. My mother wore it at her debut, and her mother before her." Hargreaves nodded, jotting a note. "And you noticed it? Missing when?" "When I adjusted my shawl, just before midnight," Beatrice replied. "I raised my wrist, and it was gone. I searched the floor, thinking it might have fallen, but there was nothing." Her voice rose slightly, betraying her distress. Miss Marple noted the way Beatrice's fingers twisted together, a sign of agitation she hadn't shown the previous evening. Pride can make one careless, Miss Marple thought, but it can also make one certain. Next was Clara Langston, who entered the library with a defiant tilt to her chin. Her sapphire gown had been replaced by a tailored day dress, but her confidence remained. She stood before Hargreaves, her engagement ring catching the morning light. A subtle reminder of her new status. "I didn't take it," she said before the inspector could speak, her tone sharp. "I admired the bracelet when Aunt Beatrice showed it to me, but I had no reason to steal it. Henry provides for me, and we're to be married in the spring." Her eyes darted to Miss Marple, as if daring her to contradict. Hargreaves raised an eyebrow. "You were close to your aunt during the evening, Miss Langston. Did you handle the bracelet?" Clara shook her head. "I only looked at it. Aunt Beatrice held it up, and I said it was beautiful." That was all. She paused, then added, "I was with Henry most of the night, dancing or talking. Ask him if you don't believe me." Her voice carried a note of challenge, but Miss Marple detected a flicker of unease in her posture, the way her shoulders tensed when the bracelet was mentioned. "Ambition can be a restless thing," Miss Marple mused, her needles pausing for a moment. "And a young woman on the cusp of wealth might see a jewel as more than decoration." Hargreaves made a note, then asked, "Did you notice anyone near your aunt during the evening? Anyone who might have had the opportunity?" Clara hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. "There were so many people," she said finally. "Guests, servants, everyone moving about. I wasn't watching her every moment." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Clara's answer was vague, almost too careful, as if she were avoiding something. She knows more than she's saying, Miss Marple thought, but whether it's guilt or fear, I cannot yet tell. Percival Reed was next, his thin frame almost swallowed by the library's grandeur. He adjusted his spectacles nervously, his fingers twitching as he sat. "I'm a jeweller, Inspector, not a thief," he said, his voice clipped. "I crafted that bracelet, reset the diamonds myself. Why would I steal my own work?" Hargreaves leaned forward. "You knew its value, Mr. Reed, and I understand your business has been struggling." Reed's face flushed, but he met the inspector's gaze. "Rumours," he said sharply. "My finances are my own concern. I was discussing a commission with Mr. Grayson during the gala. Ask him. I didn't go near Lady Beatrice after the dancing began." Miss Marple watched Reed closely, noting the way his hands fidgeted, the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. A man in debt, she thought, might see a bracelet as salvation, especially one he knows so well. She recalled the ledger she'd glimpsed in his shop, half hidden under papers. Reed's alibi seemed solid, but alibis could be arranged, and his knowledge of the bracelet's design gave him an edge. He would know how to remove it quickly, she reflected, her needles resuming their rhythm. Finally, Ellen Carter, the maid, was called. She entered the library hesitantly, her apron pristine but her face pale, her eyes darting to the corners of the room. She was young, no more than 20, with a slight frame and a manner that suggested she wished to be invisible. Hargreaves's tone softened, sensing her nervousness. "Ellen, you were serving at the gala. Did you see anything unusual? Anyone near Lady Beatrice's bracelet?" Ellen shook her head, her voice barely audible. "No, sir. I was busy with the trays, clearing glasses. I didn't see nothing." Her words stumbled, and she clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white. Miss Marple tilted her head, studying the girl. Ellen's eyes avoided contact, and there was a faint tremor in her hands, almost imperceptible. Fear, Miss Marple thought, or guilt, or perhaps both. She noted the worn hem of Ellen's apron, the faint bruise on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. A girl in service, she mused, often has little to call her own. A bracelet like that could change a life. She spoke gently, her voice cutting through the silence. "You must have been very busy, Ellen, with so many guests. Did you have a moment to notice the bracelet at all?" Ellen started, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple before dropping again. "No, ma'am," she said quickly. "I was just doing my work." Hargreaves frowned but made a note, dismissing her with a nod. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind turning over the girl's response. She's hiding something, she thought, but whether it's the theft or something else, I cannot say. With the interviews complete, Hargreaves organized a search of the hall. Footmen and maids scoured the ballroom, the drawing room, the terrace, even the gravel drive where guests had departed. They found nothing, no bracelet, no broken clasp, no stray diamond. The inspector rubbed his chin, his frustration evident. "It's likely one of the guests slipped it into a pocket," he said, glancing at the list of attendees. "Or perhaps it was dropped and picked up by someone who didn't realize its value." His tone suggested he didn't believe the latter. Miss Marple folded her knitting, her eyes thoughtful. "Or perhaps," she said, her voice so soft it might have been overlooked, "it was someone who knew exactly what they were," doing Hargreaves turned, surprised by her certainty. "You have a theory, Miss Marple?" he asked. She smiled, her expression as mild as ever. "Not a theory, Inspector. merely an observation. People are rarely as careful as they think, and motives are often simpler than they appear. As they left the library, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on the fireplace where she'd sat the previous night. She recalled Ellen's nervous glances, Clara's fleeting hesitation, Reed's defensive tone, Beatrice's trembling hands. It's like a tapestry, she thought, with threads that seem separate, but weave together in the end. She stepped into the hall, where the morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the portraits of Ashford's past. The bracelet, she knew, was more than a jewel. It was a key to someone's heart, or perhaps their desperation. And Miss Marple was determined to find it. The inquiry adjourned for the day, with Hargreaves promising to return after reviewing his notes. Beatrice invited Miss Marple to stay for luncheon, but she declined, citing a need to rest. In truth, she wanted to walk the village, to listen to its whispers. As she left Ashford Hall, she passed the servants' entrance, where Ellen was sweeping the steps. The girl's eyes met hers for a moment, then dropped quickly. Miss Marple smiled kindly, but her mind was sharp. A girl like that, she thought, reminds me of young Annie and Saint. Mary Mead, who took a silver spoon to buy a ticket to London. Fear makes people bold, and bold people make mistakes. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped at the post office, where the postmistress, Mrs. Cleary, was eager to chat. "That Ellen Carter was here yesterday," Mrs. Cleary said, leaning over the counter. "Sent a letter to London. In a hurry she was." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "How interesting," she said, filing the detail away. She returned to Dolly's cottage, where she resumed her knitting, her thoughts weaving a pattern only she could see. The bracelet was out there, she was certain, and with it the truth, waiting to be unravelled by a patient hand. Chapter 3. The Hostess's Tale. The sun climbed higher over Ashford Hall, its rays filtering through the tall windows of the morning room, where Miss Jane Marple sat opposite Lady Beatrice Ashford. The room, with its delicate chinoiserie wallpaper and polished rosewood furniture, exuded a quiet elegance, but the atmosphere was taut, like a violin string stretched to its limit. Beatrice, dressed in a sombre grey frock that seemed to mourn the loss of her bracelet, poured tea with a steady hand, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Miss Marple, her knitting resting in her lap, accepted a cup with a gentle smile, her demeanour as unassuming as ever. "You've had a trying time, Lady Beatrice," she said softly. "A theft in one's own home is such a violation." Beatrice's lips, tightened, and she set the teapot down with a faint clink. "It's not just the bracelet, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's the betrayal. Someone in this house, someone I trusted, took it." Her words carried a weight of indignation, but Miss Marple noted a trace of something else. Perhaps fear, or perhaps pride wounded beyond the loss of a jewel. She sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving Beatrice's face, taking in the faint lines of strain, the way her fingers brushed the empty spot on her wrist where the bracelet had been. "I'd like to hear your account again, if you don't mind," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. "Sometimes the smallest detail comes back to us when we least expect it." Beatrice nodded, settling into her chair, her posture rigid. "I wore the bracelet all evening," she began, her voice measured. "It was my mother's, you know, passed down through 3 generations. Mr. Reed reset the diamonds last month, and I was eager to show it off at the gala. I showed it to Clara early in the evening. She was so taken with it, and later I danced with Colonel Bantry. I distinctly felt its weight during the waltz. It was still there when I spoke with Mrs. Grayson by the terrace doors, just before the guests began to leave. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to Beatrice's words. "And you didn't remove it at any point?" she asked, her eyes bright with interest. Beatrice shook her head emphatically. "No, never. The clasp was secure. Mr. Reed assured me of that. I only noticed it was gone when I reached for my shawl, just before midnight. I lifted my arm, and my wrist was bare." Her voice caught, and she looked away, her gaze settling on a portrait of her mother above the fireplace. "It's not just the value, Miss Marple. It's what it meant to my family." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, but her mind was already turning over the details. Pride in an heirloom, she thought, can make one blind to its vulnerabilities. And a woman like Beatrice, so sure of her place, might not notice a clever hand. She set her teacup down delicately. "You mentioned showing it to Clara. Was anyone else nearby then?" Beatrice frowned, her brow furrowing as she thought back. Clara's fiancé, Henry, was there, of course, and I believe Mr. Reed was passing by. He nodded to me, as if to admire his work. The maid, Ellen, was serving drinks not far off. Others were milling about, but no one stood out. Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment. "Ellen, you say?" "She seems a quiet girl." Beatrice's expression hardened slightly. "Too quiet, if you ask me. She's only been with us a month, and I've caught her staring at things. My jewellery box, the silver. I thought it was just curiosity, but now—" She trailed off, her implication clear. Miss Marple made a mental note, recalling Ellen's nervous demeanour during the inquiry. Suspicion falls easily on servants, she thought, but ease can be deceptive. "And Mr. Reed," Miss Marple continued, her tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "You trust his work, of course, but I've heard whispers in the village about his finances." Beatrice's eyes sharpened, a spark of gossip igniting. "Yes, I've heard that too," she admitted. "The butcher mentioned Reed owing money to a supplier in London. But he's always been reliable. His father worked for mine, you know. Still, a man in debt." She hesitated, then added, "He was very particular about the bracelet, checking the clasp himself before the gala. He said it was his finest work." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind cataloguing the detail. A jeweller's pride, she thought, or perhaps a jeweller's opportunity. She shifted the conversation gently, and Clara, such a spirited girl. She must be thrilled with her engagement. Beatrice's expression softened, but only slightly. "She's ambitious, my niece. Henry's wealth has opened doors for her, and she's eager to step through them. She loved the bracelet, but I can't imagine her taking it. She's family, after all." The words were firm, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of doubt in Beatrice's eyes, as if family ties were not as binding as she wished. The conversation turned to the guest list, which Beatrice provided with meticulous detail. Most were local gentry, Colonel and Mrs. Bantry, the Graysons, the vicar and his wife, people unlikely to risk their reputations for a theft. But there were a few newcomers, Beatrice noted, Henry's business associates from London, and a cousin of his, a rather loud young man. I didn't know them well. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the names miaudos. Strangers can be bold, she thought, but so can those who feel safe in familiarity. As they spoke, a footman entered to announce that Inspector Hargreaves had returned, requesting a word with Beatrice. Miss Marple rose, her knitting tucked neatly into her bag. "You've been most helpful, Lady Beatrice," she said. "I'll take a turn about the grounds, if I may." The air does wonders for clear thinking. Beatrice nodded, distracted, and Miss Marple slipped out, her steps light but purposeful. Outside, the gardens of Ashford Hall were a riot of late summer blooms, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She walked slowly along the gravel path, where the guests had departed the previous night, her eyes scanning the ground. The search had found nothing, but she paused by a rosebush near the terrace, where Beatrice had stood with Mrs. Grayson. "A bracelet doesn't vanish," she murmured, "but it can be made to disappear." She bent slightly, her sharp eyes catching a glint in the gravel. A tiny shard of glass, not a diamond, but enough to spark a thought. "Misdirection," she mused, "is a thief's oldest trick." She continued her walk, passing the servants' entrance, where she glimpsed Ellen carrying a basket of linens. The girl's head was down, her movements quick, as if eager to avoid notice. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. A girl in a hurry, she thought, often has something to hide. She made her way to the village, stopping at the tea shop where Mrs. Cleary, the postmistress, was chatting with a customer. "Good morning, Mrs. Cleary," Miss Marple said brightly. "I hear young Ellen Carter was in a rush yesterday. London's a long way to send a letter." Mrs. Cleary's eyes lit up, eager for a gossip. "Oh, yes, Miss Marple. She was here just before the gala, posting a letter to some address in Whitechapel. Looked nervous as a cat, she did." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "How curious," she said, but her mind was racing. Whitechapel was no place for a maid's casual correspondence. Fear or desperation, she thought, drives people to strange places. Returning to Dolly Bantry's cottage, Miss Marple settled by the window. Her knitting resumed. Beatrice's account had been clear, but clarity could be a mask. Her pride in the bracelet, her quick suspicion of Ellen, her mention of Reed's troubles, all were threads in a pattern not yet fully formed. People talk of heirlooms, Miss Marple mused, but they rarely speak of what they cost to keep. She thought of her own village, of a widow who'd sold a family ring to pay a debt, and of a girl who'd hidden a stolen brooch under a floorboard. "Motives," she said softly, "are as old as time and as simple as need." As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple resolved to speak with Clara next. Beatrice's niece, with her bright ambition and new wealth, was a puzzle in herself. A young woman on the rise, Miss Marple thought, might see a bracelet as a stepping stone, or a temptation. She tucked her knitting away, her mind already weaving the next thread in the mystery of the missing diamond bracelet. Chapter 4. The Guest's Ambition. The gardens of Ashford Hall shimmered in the late morning light, their manicured hedges and vibrant dahlias, a stark contrast to the tension that lingered within the house. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat shielding her eyes from the sun, strolled along a gravel path toward the rose arbour where Clara Langston had agreed to meet her. The young woman's sapphire gown from the gala had been replaced by a chic cream dress, its tailored lines accentuating her confident bearing. Yet, as Miss Marple approached, She noted a certain restlessness in Clara's posture, her fingers twisting the sapphire engagement ring on her left hand, her gaze darting toward the hall as if expecting interruption. "Good morning, Miss Langston," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as the breeze stirring the roses. "What a lovely spot to talk." "The gardens do put one at ease, don't they?" Clara offered a tight smile, her eyes wary. "I suppose so," she replied, gesturing to a wrought-iron bench, "though I can't say I'm feeling particularly at ease with all this fuss about the bracelet." She sat, crossing her legs with a practiced grace, but her foot tapped lightly, betraying her nerves. Miss Marple settled beside her, her knitting bag resting at her feet. She drew out a half-finished scarf, her needles clicking softly as she began. "It's a distressing business, a theft," she said, her tone conversational. "Especially something so precious to your aunt. You were quite taken with the bracelet, I understand." Clara's chin lifted, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I admired it, yes. It's stunning. Who wouldn't notice it? But I didn't take it, Miss Marple. I've no need to steal. Henry's business is thriving, and we're to have a house in London after the wedding." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of mild interest. "Of course, my dear. A young woman with such prospects has little need for petty theft. Still, it's curious how a bracelet can vanish in a room full of people." Her needles paused, and she met Clara's gaze. "You were near your aunt when she showed it to you. Did you notice anyone else paying particular attention?" Clara hesitated, her fingers stilling on her ring. "Not really," she said slowly. "There were so many people around. Guests, servants." "I was focused on Aunt Beatrice and Henry." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "Henry was with you, then?" A devoted fiancé, Clara nodded, a touch too quickly. "Yes, we danced most of the evening. He only left me briefly to speak with his cousin Rupert. Everyone saw us together." Her voice was firm, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease, a slight tightening of her jaw. "She's protecting someone," Miss Marple thought, or perhaps herself. Ambition makes one cautious, but it also makes one bold. The conversation turned to the gala itself. Clara described the evening with a practiced ease, recounting her dances, her conversations with Henry's associates, and her admiration of the bracelet when Beatrice displayed it. "It was just before the first waltz," she said. Aunt Beatrice held up her wrist, and the diamonds caught the light so beautifully. "I told her it was the finest thing I'd ever seen." Miss Marple tilted her head. "And Mr. Reed, the jeweller, he was nearby, wasn't he? Your aunt mentioned his work on the bracelet." Clara's expression shifted, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Yes, I suppose he was." He nodded to Aunt Beatrice, like he was proud of it. He'd been hovering all evening, talking to people about his shop. She paused, then added, "I visited his shop a few days before the gala, you know. I was looking at necklaces for the wedding. He showed me some lovely pieces, but nothing like the bracelet." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her mind filing away the detail. A visit to the jeweller, she thought, might mean curiosity or calculation. "Did you notice the maid Ellen at all?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as casual as if inquiring about the weather. Clara's eyes flickered, and she shrugged. She was everywhere, wasn't she? Serving drinks, clearing plates. I didn't pay her much mind. Her answer was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the way Clara's foot stopped tapping, as if she were suddenly conscious of her movements. "She's choosing her words carefully," Miss Marple thought, "and careful words often hide something." The arbour grew quiet, save for the hum of bees and the distant call of a thrush. Miss Marple let the silence linger, knowing it often prompted more than questions. Clara shifted, her fingers resuming their dance with her ring. "I don't know why everyone's so quick to suspect me," she said abruptly. "I'm family. Aunt Beatrice trusts me, and Henry, he'd never let me want for anything." Her voice carried a note of indignation, but Miss Marple sensed a deeper current, perhaps a fear of being seen as less than the perfect fiancée. "No one suspects you, my dear," Miss Marple said soothingly, though her mind was far from convinced. "But you're a perceptive young woman. You must have seen something, even if it seemed unimportant." Clara's lips parted, then closed, and she looked away, her gaze settling on a rosebush, heavy with blooms. "There was a moment," she said at last, her voice low, "when Aunt Beatrice was dancing with Colonel Bantry. I saw Ellen adjusting her shawl. It was quick, but she was very close to her. I didn't think much of it at the time." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright with interest. "How interesting," she said. "A maid's duties bring her close to many things, don't they?" Clara nodded, but her expression was guarded, as if she regretted saying so much. Miss Marple made a mental note, recalling Ellen's nervous demeanour and the bruise on her wrist. A girl in service, she thought, might see a bracelet as a way out of trouble or into it. As they rose to return to the house, Miss Marple glanced at Clara's ring, its sapphire glinting in the sunlight. "Such a lovely ring," she remarked. "A gift from Henry, I presume." Clara's smile was genuine this time, though it held a trace of pride. "Yes, he chose it himself. He says it matches my eyes." Miss Marple nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. A young woman with a wealthy fiancé, she mused, might still crave something of her own. Or perhaps she knows more than she's willing to share. They parted at the terrace, Clara returning to the hall, while Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning the gravel path where the guests had departed. She thought of Clara's ambition, her quick defence of Henry, her mention of Ellen's proximity to Beatrice. "It's like a village dance," she thought, "where everyone moves in step, but one person knows a different tune." She recalled a girl in St. Mary Mead, newly engaged to a prosperous farmer, who'd taken a silver locket from her employer, not for need, but for the thrill of possession. "Ambition," Miss Marple murmured, "can be as dangerous as desperation." She made her way to the village, stopping at the tea shop where Mrs. Cleary was wiping down the counter. "Good day, Mrs. Cleary," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I hear Miss Langston's been quite the talk, with her engagement and all." Mrs. Cleary leaned forward, eager to share. "Oh, yes, Miss Marple. She's been strutting about like a peacock since that ring went on her finger. But I saw her at Reed's shop last week, looking at more than necklaces, if you ask me. She was asking about diamonds, how they're valued and such." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "How curious," she said, tucking the information away. She returned to Dolly Bantry's cottage, where she resumed her knitting by the window, the scarf growing steadily under her fingers. Clara's ambition, Reed's pride, Ellen's fear, Beatrice's loss. The threads were beginning to weave together, but the pattern was still unclear. It's always the small things, Miss Marple thought, that reveal the truth. A glance, a word, a moment's hesitation. They tell the story if one listens Chapter 5. The Jeweller's Craft. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its quaint cottages and bustling high street, hummed with the quiet rhythm of daily life. But beneath the surface, whispers of the theft at Ashford Hall stirred like leaves in a breeze. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the midday sun, made her way to the shop of Percival Reed, jeweller. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of polished metal and wax. The shop was a treasure trove of delicate craftsmanship. Glass cases displayed glittering rings, necklaces and brooches, each catching the light with a promise of elegance. Reed himself stood behind the counter, his thin frame bent over a loop, examining a small gem with meticulous care. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his spectacles glinting, and offered a tight smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reed," Miss Marple said, her voice as warm as a fireside chat. "I was passing by and couldn't resist admiring your work." "Such skill you have." She gestured toward a tray of sapphire earrings, her eyes bright with interest. Reed's smile softened, though his hands remained restless, adjusting his cuffs. "You're very kind, Miss Marple," he said. "It's a trade passed down from my father. We take pride in every piece." His tone was polished, but Miss Marple noted a faint strain, as if pride were a weight he carried uneasily. She wandered to a case displaying a diamond pendant, its facets sparkling like the bracelet she'd seen at the gala. "You crafted Lady Ashford's bracelet, I believe," she said, her tone casual, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "Such a beautiful piece." It must have been a labour of love. Reed's expression tightened, and he set the loop down with care. "It was," he said, 20 flawless diamonds, set in white gold. I reset the heirloom stones myself, at Lady Beatrice's request. It's worth a small fortune, though its sentimental value is greater, she says." His voice held a note of professional pride, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of something else, perhaps resentment or perhaps anxiety. She tilted her head, her needles clicking softly as she drew her knitting from her bag. "It must be distressing, then, to hear it's gone missing," she said. "You knew its value better than anyone." Reed's eyes narrowed, and he adjusted his spectacles, a nervous habit Miss Marple had noted during the inquiry. "I'm no thief, Miss Marple," he said sharply. "I was with Mr. Grayson, discussing a commission when the bracelet vanished. He'll confirm it. Besides, why would I steal my own work? I'd gain nothing from it." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, disarming. "Of course, Mr. Reed. No one suggests such a thing. But a jeweller's eye is so keen. You must have noticed something that night. Someone near Lady Beatrice, perhaps?" Reed hesitated, his fingers tapping the counter. "It was a crowded room," he said. "I saw Lady Beatrice showing the bracelet to Miss Clara, and I nodded to her. Professional courtesy, you understand. Later, I was busy with Grayson. I didn't see the maid Ellen, if that's what you're getting at. She was scurrying about with trays, as maids do." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting his. "You've a sharp memory, Mr. Reed," she said, "and a sharp eye for detail. Did you inspect the bracelet's clasp before the gala?" Reed nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I did. Lady Beatrice brought it to me a week prior. The clasp was secure, a spring-lock design of my own making. It couldn't have fallen off." His voice was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way his hands clenched, as if gripping an unspoken worry. A secure clasp, she thought, makes a theft more deliberate. And a jeweller in trouble might know just how to undo it. She glanced around the shop, her eyes lingering on a ledger half hidden beneath a velvet cloth. Its edges were worn, and a corner of paper protruded, marked with hurried figures. "Your shop is so well kept," she said, her tone admiring. "It must be a challenge, though, with trade so variable." Reed's face flushed, and he moved the ledger out of sight with a quick motion. "Business has its ups and downs," he said curtly, "but I manage. My father taught me to keep my affairs in order." His defensiveness was palpable, and Miss Marple made its mental note. Debt, she thought, can make a man desperate, and desperation can make him clever. The conversation turned to the gala itself. Reed described his interactions, his pride in seeing the bracelet admired, his brief exchange with Clara about her wedding jewellery. "She's a sharp one, Miss Langston," he said, a trace of admiration in his voice. "Asked about diamond grading, as if she meant to buy something grand." But she didn't linger long. Miss Marple nodded, recalling Clara's mention of her visit to the shop. A young woman planning a wedding, she thought, might ask about diamonds for many reasons, or none at all. As she prepared to leave, Miss Marple paused by a display of brooches, her fingers brushing a simple pearl design. "You've a gift, Mr. Reed," she said. "It's a pity such a fine piece as the bracelet should cause so much trouble." Reed's lips twitched, as if unsure whether to smile or frown. "It's a pity indeed," he said, "but I've no doubt Inspector Hargreaves will find it." "He's thorough," Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, I'm sure it will turn up," she said. "Things often do, when one looks in the right place." She stepped out into the high street, the bell chiming behind her. The village was alive with activity, carts rumbling, children laughing, shopkeepers calling out their wares. Miss Marple walked slowly, her mind turning over Reed's words. His alibi with Mr. Grayson was solid, but alibis could be arranged, and his knowledge of the bracelet's design gave him an edge. A man who crafts a jewel, she thought, knows how to unmake it too. She recalled a jeweller in St. Mary Mead years ago who'd sold a client's ring to settle a gambling debt, claiming it was lost. Pride and debt, she mused, are a dangerous pair. She stopped at the butcher's shop, where Mr. Harris was wiping his hands on an apron. "Good day, Miss Marple," he said, his face brightening. "Heard you helping with that business at the hall?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene. "Just lending an ear, Mr. Harris. I hear, Mr. Reed's been having a rough time of it." Harris leaned forward, his voice low. "Aye, he was in here last week, arguing with a man from London, some creditor by the sound of it. Reed looked fit to burst, but he paid up quick enough." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the detail. Debt, she thought, and a visitor from London. How very interesting returning to Dolly Bantry's cottage. Miss Marple settled by the window, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Reed's nervous hands, his hidden ledger, his intimate knowledge of the bracelet, all were threads in the growing tapestry of the mystery. A jeweller's craft, she thought, is not just in making jewels, but in knowing their worth and their market. She recalled Clara's visit to the shop, Ellen's nervous glances, Beatrice's certainty about the clasp. "The truth," she murmured, is like a gem. It sparkles only when you hold it to the light. As the afternoon light faded, Miss Marple resolved to speak with Ellen next. The maid, with her quiet demeanour and hidden bruise, was a puzzle in herself. A girl in service, Miss Marple thought, sees more than she says, and knows more than she shows. Her needles clicked on, weaving a scarf and a story, each stitch bringing her closer to the heart of the missing diamond bracelet. Chapter 6. The Maid's Shadow. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone floors of Ashford Hall, where the bustle of the gala had given way to an uneasy quiet. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, made her way to the servants' quarters, a part of the house rarely seen by guests but rich with the undercurrents of daily life. She had arranged to speak with Ellen Carter, the maid, under the pretence of inquiring about a misplaced shawl from the gala. The housekeeper, Mrs. Norris, a stern woman with a penchant for order, led her to the pantry where Ellen was polishing silver, her movements quick and precise, as if she could scrub away the suspicion that clung to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Norris," Miss Marple said with her usual gentle smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I shan't take long," the housekeeper nodded, casting a sharp glance at Ellen before retreating. The pantry was small, its shelves lined with gleaming cutlery and crystal, the air heavy with the scent of polish. Ellen stood by a narrow table, her hands gripping a cloth, her face pale under the dim light of a single bulb. She was young, with a slight build and eyes that darted like a trapped bird's, avoiding Miss Marple's steady gaze. "Good afternoon, Ellen," Miss Marple said, settling onto a wooden stool, her knitting emerging from her bag as naturally as breath. "Such a fine job you're doing with the silver." "It must be quite a change, coming from London to a place like this." Her tone was warm, almost grandmotherly, but her eyes were sharp, noting the faint tremor in Ellen's hands, the way her apron hung slightly askew, as if hastily adjusted. Ellen nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. It's quieter here." She resumed polishing a spoon, her movements mechanical, but Miss Marple saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened around the cloth. "London's a busy place," Miss Marple continued, her needles clicking softly. "I expect you've seen all sorts there. But a grand house like Ashford Hall, well, it has its own challenges, doesn't it? Especially with something like a diamond bracelet going missing." Ellen's hand faltered, and the spoon clattered onto the table. She snatched it up quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I don't know nothing about that, ma'am," she said, her voice sharp with panic. "I was just serving like always. I didn't see nothing." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle concern. "Of course, my dear. No one's accusing you. But you were so busy at the gala, moving among the guests. You must have seen something, even if it seemed unimportant." Ellen's eyes flicked to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. "I was clearing glasses, ma'am," she said, her words tumbling out. "I didn't have time to look at bracelets or anything else. I just did my job." Her voice cracked slightly, and Miss Marple noted the bruise on her wrist, more visible now as her sleeve shifted. It was faint but unmistakable, a shadow of violence that told a story of its own. A girl in service, Miss Marple thought, often carries more than trays. "You've not been here long, have you, Ellen?" Miss Marple asked, her needles pausing for a moment. "Only a month, I hear." It takes time to settle in a new place. Ellen nodded, her gaze fixed on the spoon. I came from a house in London, she said. It was different. I needed a change. Her words were clipped, and Miss Marple sensed a door closing, a reluctance to share more. A change, she thought, or an escape. And a bracelet like that could buy a great deal of freedom. Miss Marple shifted the conversation, her tone as light as if discussing the weather. You were near Lady Beatrice during the gala, weren't you? Miss Clara mentioned seeing you adjust her shawl. Ellen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. I was just helping, ma'am, she said quickly. Her shawl was slipping, and I fixed it. That's all her voice was defensive, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands clenched the cloth, as if anchoring herself against a storm. Of course, Miss Marple said soothingly. A maid's duties are never-ending, aren't they? Always close to the action, but rarely noticed Ellen said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click filling the silence. She recalled Clara's hesitant mention of Ellen's proximity to Beatrice, Reed's defensive posture, Beatrice's certainty about the clasp. A maid, she thought, sees everything and says nothing, unless she has a reason. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but probing. It must be hard, Ellen, being so far from home. Do you have family in London? Someone you write to, perhaps? Ellen's face paled further, and her hands stilled. No family, ma'am, she said, her voice barely audible. Just friends. She turned back to the silver, her movements jerky, as if eager to end the conversation. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the postmistress's gossip about Ellen's letter to Whitechapel. Friends in Whitechapel, she thought, and a bruise on her wrist. A girl like that might see a bracelet as a lifeline. As Miss Marple rose to leave, she paused by the door, her eyes lingering on Ellen's worn shoes, scuffed at the toes. You're doing well here, Ellen, she said kindly, but if you ever need a friendly ear, I'm staying with Mrs. Bantry. Ellen nodded, her expression guarded, and Miss Marple stepped into the corridor, her mind alive with possibilities. Fear, she thought, can make a thief of anyone, but it takes cunning to steal a bracelet in a crowded room. Outside, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting the gardens in a golden glow. Miss Marple walked slowly toward the village, her thoughts weaving a pattern from the threads of the day. Ellen's nervousness, her vague history, her letter to Whitechapel, all pointed to a story untold. She recalled a maid in St. Mary Mead years ago who'd stolen a silver candlestick to pay off a bullying brother. Desperation, Miss Marple murmured, is a powerful motive, but so is the need to escape. She stopped at the village green, where children played and shopkeepers swept their steps. Mrs. Cleary, the postmistress, was locking up for the day, and Miss Marple greeted her with a smile. Good evening, Mrs. Cleary, she said. I hear young Ellen's been keeping you busy with her letters. Mrs. Cleary's eyes lit up, eager for a chat. Oh, yes, Miss Marple. She was in again today, posting another letter to that same address in Whitechapel. Looked like she hadn't slept a wink. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. How curious, she said, but her mind was racing. 2 letters in as many days, she thought, and a girl who looks like she's running from something. Returning to Dolly Bantry's cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Ellen's shadow loomed large in her thoughts. a figure both vulnerable and elusive. A maid, she thought, is invisible until she isn't. And a bracelet like that could buy a new life, or a way out of an old one. She recalled Beatrice's pride, Clara's ambition, Reed's debts, and now Ellen's fear, each a thread in the tapestry of the theft. "The truth," she murmured, "is like a shadow. It follows you, but you must turn to see it." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple resolved to keep a closer eye on Ellen. The maid's story was far from complete, and the bracelet, she was certain, was closer than anyone thought. Her needles clicked on, weaving a scarf and a solution, each stitch bringing her nearer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 7. A village whisper, the evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a chill, a subtle reminder of autumn's approach. As Miss Jane Marple sat in the cosy parlour of Mrs. Dolly Bantry's cottage. The fire cast a warm glow over the chintz curtains and polished oak table, where a tray of tea and scones sat invitingly. Dolly, her cheeks flushed with the thrill of local intrigue, was in fine form, regaling Miss Marple with the latest village talk about the theft at Ashford Hall. "It's all anyone can speak of, Jane," she said, her eyes sparkling. "The butcher's boy swears he saw Ellen Carter at the post office again, and Mrs. Cleary says she looked like she'd seen a ghost. And then there's Mr. Reed. Did you know he's been dodging a man from London? Some creditor, they say." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, her scarf growing under her deft fingers as she listened. "The village always knows more than it thinks," she said, her voice mild but her eyes bright with interest. "A whisper here, a glance there. It's like pieces of a puzzle, Dolly. One only needs to fit them together." She sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the threads of gossip, each one a potential clue to the missing diamond bracelet. Ellen's letters, Reed's debts, Clara's ambition, Beatrice's pride, all were fragments of a larger picture, and Miss Marple was determined to see it whole. She had spent the day quietly observing, her walk through the village yielding more than just fresh air. At the grocer's, she'd overheard a maid from Ashford Hall mention Ellen's odd hours, how she'd been seen slipping out at night, her coat pulled tight despite the mild weather. At the bakery, the owner had grumbled about Reed's delayed payments, hinting at a heated exchange with a stranger in a dark suit. And now, Dolly's tidbits added new colours to the tapestry. Ellen and a man from London, Miss Marple thought, and Reed with his own troubles. It's like a village dance, where everyone steps carefully, but someone always treads on a toe. "Dolly," Miss Marple said, setting her teacup down, "you mentioned a man visiting Ellen. What sort did he seem?" Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Rough, by all accounts. Mrs. Norris saw him lurking near the servants' entrance a week ago, late at night. Tall, with a scarred face, she said, not from here, that's certain." Ellen looked frightened when she spoke to him. Or so the scullery maid told me. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning over the detail. A scarred man, she thought, and a girl with a bruise. Fear can drive a person to desperate acts, and a bracelet could buy a way out. She recalled her conversation with Ellen, the maid's pale face and trembling hands, the bruise half hidden by her sleeve. A girl in service, Miss Marple mused, sees the wealth of others every day but has none of her own. A diamond bracelet could be a ticket to freedom, or a chain to a worse fate. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, where a young maid had stolen a pearl necklace to pay off a blackmailer. History repeats itself, she murmured, because human nature never changes. Miss Marple rose, her knitting tucked neatly into her bag. "I think I'll take a stroll to the post office before it closes," she said. "A bit of air clears the ha." Mine Dolly's eyes widened. "You're on to something, Jane. I can tell. Do be careful. There's a thief about after all." Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene. "Oh, I'm always careful, Dolly. It's the careless ones who give themselves away." The village was settling into evening as Miss Marple stepped onto the high street, the lamps casting soft pools of light on the cobblestones. The post office was still open, and Mrs. Cleary, ever eager for a chat, greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, come to post a letter, or are you sleuthing about that bracelet?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were sharp, hungry for news. Miss Marple chuckled, her demeanour as unassuming as ever. "Just a small errand, Mrs. Cleary, but I hear you've had a busy week, with young Ellen Carter sending letters to London." Mrs. Cleary's face lit up, and she leaned over the counter. "Oh, yes. She was in again this morning, posting another to that Whitechapel address. Looked like she hadn't slept in days, poor thing. And the envelope, thick it was, not just a letter. I thought it odd, but I didn't pry." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A thick envelope, she thought, and a girl in a hurry. Not a letter, perhaps, but something more. She recalled the diamond found in the gravel drive, a clue that felt staged, and wondered if Ellen's letters held more than words. "Thank you, Mrs. Cleary," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "You're a font of knowledge, as always." She stepped outside, her eyes lingering on the postbox, its red paint gleaming under the lamplight. A letter to Whitechapel, she thought, and a man with a scarred face. It's like a story from one of Dolly's novels, but real life is often stranger. As she walked back to the cottage, Miss Marple passed the church, where the vicar was locking the gate. "Good evening, Miss Marple," he called. "I hear you're helping with the trouble at Ashford Hall." Miss Marple paused, her expression thoughtful. "Just lending a hand, mister." "Vicars, I understand Miss Clara Langston's been seen about the village, quite the talk with her engagement." The vicar nodded, his face kind but weary. "Oh, yes. She was at Reed's shop last week, asking about jewellery valuations. Said it was for her trousseau, but she seemed awfully curious about diamonds, how they're sold, who buys them." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her face remained serene. "How interesting," she said, filing the detail away. "Clara's ambition," she thought, "and Reed's debts, Ellen's fear, Beatrice's loss. It's a pattern, but the centre is still hidden." She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead who'd asked too many questions about a neighbour's silver, only to be caught selling it in the next town. Curiosity, she mused, can be innocent, or it can be a mask. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its rhythm. Dolly was reading a novel, but her eyes kept drifting to her friend. "You've got that look, Jane," she said, "like you're seeing something no one else does." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "It's only a matter of listening, Dolly. People talk and the village listens. The trick is knowing which whispers matter." She thought of Ellen's letters, Reed's creditor, Clara's questions, and the bruise on a maid's wrist. "It's like a tapestry," she said softly, with threads that cross and tangle. But pull the right one, and the whole thing unravels. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind turned to the next step. The whispers of St. Mary Mead were painting a picture, but it was incomplete. Ellen's shadow loomed largest, her fear a palpable thread. But Clara's ambition and Reed's troubles were not to be dismissed. The bracelet, she thought, is more than a jewel. It's a mirror, reflecting what people want and what they fear. Her needles clicked on, weaving a scarf and a solution, each stitch bringing her closer to the truth. Chapter 8. The Bracelet's Trail. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Ashford Hall, softening the edges of the manicured lawns, and lending an air of secrecy to the great house. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn about her shoulders, stood on the terrace overlooking the gravel drive where the gala guests had departed 2 nights prior. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked roses, and the village of St. Mary Mead was just waking beyond the estate's gates. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her gentle demeanour, scanned the path where Inspector Hargreaves had reported a curious find, a single diamond glinting in the gravel, its facets matching those of Lady Beatrice's missing bracelet. She bent to examine the spot, her movements deliberate, her mind as precise as the stitches in the scarf she knitted each evening. "It's a curious thing, Inspector," she said as Hargreaves approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. "A diamond lying here, so conveniently found." Her tone was mild, but her eyes held a spark of skepticism. Hargreaves, his moustache bristling, held up a small evidence bag containing the gem. "It must have fallen during the theft," he said, his voice confident. "The clasp broke, or the thief dropped it in their haste." Miss Marple tilted her head, her lips curving faintly. "Or perhaps," she said, "it was placed here to lead us astray. A diamond doesn't simply fall from a secure clasp, not one crafted by Mr. Reed Hargreaves frowned, his certainty wavering. "You think it's a plant, Miss Marple?" She didn't answer directly, her gaze drifting to the terrace doors where Lady Beatrice had stood during the gala. "People are clever, Inspector," she said, "and a clever thief knows how to muddy the waters." She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen watch was found in a garden to divert suspicion from the true culprit. Misdirection, she thought, is as old as theft itself. The inspector, eager to move forward, suggested a search of the servants' quarters, a task he'd hesitated to undertake without cause. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "A wise idea," she said, "though I suspect our thief is too cautious to hide such a prize so close to home." They proceeded to the servants' wing, a narrow corridor of plain rooms tucked behind the kitchen. Ellen Carter's room was small, its furnishings sparse. A narrow bed, a chipped washstand, a single chair. Hargreaves searched methodically, checking under the mattress, behind the mirror, inside the pillowcase. Miss Marple stood by the door, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes noting the room's stark simplicity. No luxuries here, she thought, but a girl with nothing might dream of everything. As Hargreaves lifted the mattress, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a loose floorboard near the bed, its edge slightly raised. She said nothing, but her mind filed the detail away. A hiding place, she thought, but an empty one, I suspect. Ellen is cleverer than that. The search yielded nothing. No bracelet, no money, no trace of the theft. Hargreaves sighed, his frustration evident. If she took it, She's hidden it well, he said. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Or she sent it elsewhere, she murmured, thinking of the thick envelope to Whitechapel. They returned to the library, where Hargreaves spread his notes on the table. "We've got the diamond," he said, "but no bracelet." And no clear suspect, Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming its rhythm. "The diamond is a clue, Inspector," she said, "but not the one you think. It's too perfect, too solitary. A thief in a hurry doesn't drop one gem and keep the rest." Hargreaves rubbed his chin, considering her words. "You're suggesting someone wanted us to find it?" Miss Marple's needles clicked. "I'm suggesting someone wanted us to look in the wrong place." Her thoughts turned to the village whispers she'd gathered. Mrs. Cleary's tale of Ellen's letters, the butcher's gossip about Reed's creditor, the vicar's mention of Clara's questions about diamond valuations, all pointed to a web of motives, each suspect entangled in their own desires. But a new piece of information had reached her that morning, courtesy of a chatty footman at Ashford Hall. Ellen had been seen asking about the train schedule to London, her voice low, her eyes darting as if expecting pursuit. Running away takes money, Miss Marple thought, and a diamond bracelet would provide plenty. She recalled Ellen's bruise, the scarred man from London, the thick envelope to Whitechapel. A girl in fear, she mused, might see a jewel as her salvation. But it takes nerve to steal in a crowded room. She thought of Clara's ambition, Reed's debts, Beatrice's carelessness, each a thread, but Ellen's shadow loomed largest. "The bracelet," she thought, "is not here." "It's moving." Like a letter in the post, Miss Marple turned to Hargreaves, her voice soft but firm. "Inspector, have you considered the post office? A package sent in haste might tell us more than a diamond in the gravel." Hargreaves's eyes widened, and he nodded, making a note. "I'll have a word with Mrs. Cleary," he said. "If Ellen's been sending things to London, we'll find out." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "People are predictable, Inspector. They hide their secrets, but they leave trails." As Hargreaves left to pursue the lead, Miss Marple walked to the village, her steps slow but purposeful. The post office was quiet, and Mrs. Cleary was sorting letters behind the counter. "Miss Marple," she exclaimed, "I was just telling the vicar's wife about Ellen's latest letter. Thick as before, and she paid extra for quick delivery. Said it was urgent." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "How helpful you are, Mrs. Cleary," she said. "Urgent, you say? That's most interesting." She thought of a girl in Saint, Mary Mead, who'd mailed a stolen brooch to a cousin, only to be caught when the package was intercepted. "The post," she murmured, "is a thief's friend, until it isn't." Returning to Dolly Bantry's cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm against the crackle of the flames, and the diamond in the gravel, Ellen's letters, the train schedule, all were pieces of a puzzle, and she was beginning to see its shape. A bracelet doesn't vanish, she thought, but it can be sent away. And a girl with a plan might think herself cleverer than she is. She recalled Beatrice's pride, Clara's curiosity, Reed's defensiveness, but Ellen's fear felt closest to the truth. "The trail," she murmured, "leads to London, and the bracelet is already on its way." Her needles clicked on, weaving a scarf and a solution, each stitch bringing her closer to unraveling the mystery of the missing diamond bracelet. Chapter 9. A Trap is Set the twilight-draped saint, Mary Mead in a soft veil, the village lamps casting golden pools on the cobblestone streets, as Miss Jane Marple made her way back to Dolly Bantry's cottage. The day had been one of quiet revelations, each whisper and glance adding to the intricate pattern of the mystery surrounding Lady Beatrice's stolen diamond bracelet. Miss Marple's mind, as sharp as the needles in her knitting bag, wove together the threads. Ellen's nervous letters to Whitechapel, Reed's hidden debts, Clara's probing questions about diamonds, and the solitary gem found in the gravel drive. A clue that felt more like a taunt than a mistake. As she settled by the fire, her scarf lengthening under her deft fingers, an idea took shape, as delicate and deliberate as her stitches. "Dolly," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as the crackle of the flames, "what do you suppose would happen if a rumour spread that Lady Beatrice was offering a reward for the bracelet's return? No questions asked." Dolly's eyes widened, her novel forgotten on her lap. "A reward? Why, Jane, that's brilliant!" It had flushed the thief out like a fox from a henhouse. Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene. "People are predictable, my dear. Greed or fear or even guilt, they loosen tongues and quicken steps." The next morning, Miss Marple shared her plan with Inspector Hargreaves over tea at Ashford Hall. The library, with its leather-bound books and heavy drapes, felt like a stage set for secrets. Hargreaves, his moustache twitching with scepticism, leaned forward. "A reward, Miss Marple?" "It's a risk. The thief might bolt with the bracelet instead." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes bright. "Or they might grow careless, Inspector." A thief who feels safe is a thief who makes mistakes. Hargreaves considered this, then nodded. "Very well, I'll see to it. A discreet word in the village should do the trick." By midday the rumour was sown, as carefully as seeds in a garden. Hargreaves mentioned the reward, a substantial sum whispered to be Lady Beatrice's idea, to the butler, who shared it with the servants. The maids carried it to the village, where it spread like wildfire. At the butcher's, the bakery, the post office. Mrs. Cleary, ever the conduit of gossip, told every customer who crossed her threshold. "No questions asked," she said, her voice hushed with excitement. "Just return the bracelet, and the money's yours." Miss Marple, sipping tea at the shop, listened with a placid smile, her mind alert to the ripples the rumour would create. She spent the afternoon observing, her walks through St. Mary Mead a study in human nature. At Ashford Hall, Lady Beatrice seemed indifferent to the rumour, her focus on a charity luncheon she was planning. "I just want the bracelet back," she told Miss Marple, her voice tinged with weariness. "The reward is nothing compared to its sentimental value." Miss Marple noted the sincerity in her eyes, but also the way her hands clasped tightly, as if bracing for more betrayal. Pride, she thought, can blind one to the obvious, but Beatrice is no fool. Clara Langston, encountered at the village green, was more animated. "A reward?" she said, her sapphire ring glinting as she adjusted her hat. "That's clever. It might tempt someone to come forward." Her tone was casual, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, as if she were weighing the rumour's implications. Ambition, Miss Marple thought, makes one watchful. But Clara's interest feels sharper than concern. She recalled Clara's questions about diamond valuations, her proximity to Beatrice at the gala, and wondered if ambition might stretch beyond a wedding trousseau. Percival Reed, when Miss Marple passed his shop, was visibly agitated. He stood outside, polishing the glass door with unnecessary vigour, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "I hear there's a reward, Mr. Reed," Miss Marple said, pausing as if to admire a brooch in the window. Reed's hand froze, and he forced a smile. "Yes, I heard. A foolish idea, if you ask me. The thief's likely sold it by now." His voice was clipped, and Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow despite the cool air. Debt, she thought, makes a man jumpy, and a reward might tempt even an honest jeweller to know more than he says. But it was Ellen Carter who drew Miss Marple's keenest attention. At Ashford Hall, she found the maid in the scullery, scrubbing pots with a ferocity that spoke of more than duty. Ellen's face was paler than before, her eyes shadowed, and she flinched when Miss Marple greeted her. "Good afternoon, Ellen," Miss Marple said, her tone as kind as ever. "Such a busy time, with all this talk of a reward." Ellen's hands stilled, and a pot slipped from her grasp, splashing water on her apron. "I don't know nothing about it, ma'am," she said, her voice trembling. "I just do my work." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes noting the girl's bitten nails, the way she avoided the other servants. Fear, she thought, is a heavy burden, and a reward might push a frightened girl to act. That evening, Miss Marple proposed a further step to Hargreaves. "Inspector," she said as they stood in the hall's drawing-room, "keep a watch on the post office. If the bracelet is moving, as I suspect, it may pass through Mrs. Cleary's hands." Hargreaves raised an eyebrow but agreed, stationing a constable to observe discreetly. Miss Marple, meanwhile, took her place in the library, a book of poetry open on her lap, though her eyes were on the door. She had asked Dolly to spread a word that she'd be there, resting after a long day. A trap, she thought, is only as good as the bait, and curiosity is a fine lure. As the clock struck 9, a soft creak announced a visitor. Ellen slipped into the library, her apron clutched in her hands, her eyes darting to Miss Marple. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I heard you were here." I just wanted to say I didn't take it." Her voice was desperate, and Miss Marple's heart softened, though her mind remained sharp. "Of course, my dear," she said, setting her book aside. "But if you know something, even a small thing, it might help." Ellen hesitated, her lips trembling, then shook her head and fled. Moments later, Hargreaves burst in, his face alight with news. "Miss Marple, we've got it!" The constable saw Ellen at the post office, just after dark. She mailed a small package to that Whitechapel address. "We intercepted it. Look!" He held up a parcel, carefully, unwrapped to reveal Lady Beatrice's diamond bracelet, its gems glinting in the lamplight. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "How very clever," she said, "and how very careless." She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a thief had mailed a stolen locket to a fence, only to be caught when the postmaster grew suspicious. The post, she thought, is a thief's ally, but it leaves a trail. The bracelet, now recovered, was a triumph, but the why and how of its theft remained. Ellen's fear, her letters, her bruised wrist, they pointed to a story yet untold. "The trap has sprung," Miss Marple murmured, "but the truth is still in the shadows." Her needles clicked softly, weaving a scarf and a solution, each stitch bringing her closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 10. The Maid's Confession. The library at Ashford Hall was bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, its heavy drapes drawn against the evening chill of St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles moving with their usual steady rhythm, a half-finished scarf pooling in her lap. Across from her, Inspector Hargreaves stood by the fireplace, the recovered diamond bracelet resting on the mahogany table between them, its gems catching the light like captured stars. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a revelation, and Miss Marple's eyes, though gentle, held a quiet intensity as she waited for Ellen Carter to be brought in. The door creaked open, and Ellen entered, flanked by a young constable whose stern expression softened at Miss Marple's nod. The maid's face was ashen, her eyes red-rimmed, and her hands twisted together, the bruise on her wrist stark against her pale skin. She stood frozen, her gaze darting from the bracelet to Miss Marple, then to the floor, as if seeking an escape that wasn't there. Hargreaves cleared his throat, his voice firm but not unkind. "Ellen, we found the bracelet in the package you mailed to Whitechapel. There's no use denying it. Best tell us the truth now." Ellen's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. A sob escaped her, raw and broken, and Miss Marple's heart stirred with pity, though her mind remained as clear as ever. There, my dear," she said softly, her needles pausing. "It's hard to carry such a secret. Tell us what happened, and it will be easier." Her voice was a soothing balm, and Ellen's sobs quieted, though her shoulders still trembled. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Ellen whispered, her voice barely audible. I had to get away." She lifted her eyes, meeting Miss Marple's, and the fear in them was palpable, a mirror to the bruise on her wrist. Hargreaves leaned forward, his notebook open. "Get away from what, Ellen? And why take the bracelet?" Ellen swallowed hard, her hands clenching her apron. "It was Tommy," she said, her voice breaking. My suitor from London. He followed me here, said I couldn't leave him. He's not a good man, sir. He hurt me." She touched her wrist, a reflexive gesture, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained kind. "Go on, Ellen," Miss Marple said gently. "Tell us about the bracelet." Ellen took a shuddering breath, her words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "I saw it at the gala, on Lady Beatrice's wrist. It was so beautiful, and I thought if I could sell it, I'd have enough to go somewhere Tommy couldn't find me. America, maybe, or Canada. Somewhere far." Her voice cracked, and she wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I didn't plan it, not at first. But when I was adjusting her shawl, during the dance with Colonel Bantry, I slipped it off. I'd learned how in London, from a girl who knew pickpockets. It was so quick, no one saw Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to Ellen's confession. A clever trick, she thought, and a desperate one. She recalled Ellen's nervous glances at the gala, the way her tray had dipped when the bracelet was mentioned. "And the diamond in the gravel?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as mild as if inquiring about the weather. Ellen's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "That was an accident, ma'am. It fell when I hid the bracelet in my apron. I didn't mean to leave it there. I was so scared I didn't notice." Hargreaves scribbled in his notebook, his brow furrowed. "And the package to Whitechapel? Who was it for?" Ellen's voice dropped to a whisper. "A man I knew from London. a pawnbroker. He said he could sell it quick, no questions. I was going to use the money to buy a ticket and disappear." Her eyes filled with tears again, and she looked at Miss Marple, pleading. "I didn't want to hurt Lady Beatrice. She's been kind to me. But Tommy, he wouldn't stop. He came to the servants' entrance, threatening me. I had no choice." Miss Marple's heart softened, but her mind was unyielding. Fear, she thought, can drive a girl to theft, but it takes courage to confess. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a young woman had stolen a silver tray to escape a cruel employer, only to return it when guilt overcame her. "You were very brave to tell us, Ellen," she said, her voice warm, "but you must have known the bracelet would be missed." Ellen nodded, her face crumpling. "I thought I could send it away before anyone noticed. I was going to leave tomorrow, after the package was gone." Hargreaves closed his notebook, his expression a mix of satisfaction and sympathy. "You'll have to come with us, Ellen," he said. "Theft is a serious matter, but your honesty will count for something." Ellen nodded, her shoulders slumping, and the constable led her out, her steps heavy with resignation. Miss Marple watched her go, her needles still for a moment. A girl in fear, she thought, is like a bird in a cage. She'll do anything to fly free, even if it means breaking her wings. As the door closed, Hargreaves turned to Miss Marple, his moustache twitching with a grudging smile. "You were right about the post office, Miss Marple. That rumour of yours flushed her out." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained modest. "It was only a nudge, Inspector. People reveal themselves when they think they're safe, or when they're desperate." She thought of Clara's curiosity, Reed's agitation, Beatrice's indignation, all cleared by Ellen's confession, yet each had clouded the truth in their own way. Hargreaves picked up the bracelet, its diamonds glinting in the lamplight. "Lady Beatrice will be relieved," he said, "though I suspect she'll want to press charges." Miss Marple nodded, her mind still turning over the details. "Perhaps," she said, "but a girl like Ellen, running from a man like Tommy, might deserve a chance to start again." "Fear is a heavy burden." Inspector Hargreaves raised an eyebrow, but he made a note, clearly swayed by her quiet authority. As they left the library, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes resting on the bracelet. It was more than a jewel. It was a mirror, reflecting the frailties of those around it. Beatrice's carelessness, Clara's ambition, Reed's desperation, and Ellen's terror. Human nature, she thought, is the real mystery, and it's always the same. She tucked her knitting into her bag, her mind already turning to the final threads of the case. Ellen's confession had solved the theft, but the story of Tommy, the scarred man from London, lingered like a shadow. "The bracelet is found," she murmured, "but the fear remains." Her needles would click again tomorrow, weaving a scarf and a story, each stitch a reminder that truth, like a diamond, shines brightest when held to the light. Chapter 11. The Resolution. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's drawing room, casting a warm glow over the velvet upholstery and polished wood. The air, once heavy with suspicion, now carried a tentative relief, as if the house itself exhaled after days of holding its breath. Miss Jane Marple sat opposite Lady Beatrice Ashford, her knitting bag at her side. A delicate teacup balanced in her hands. The diamond bracelet, recovered from Ellen Carter's ill-fated package to Whitechapel, lay on a velvet cushion between them. its gems sparkling with a quiet triumph. Beatrice, dressed in a soft lavender gown, reached for it, her fingers tracing the familiar contours with a mixture of joy and lingering dismay. "You've done wonders, Miss Marple," Beatrice said, her voice warm but tinged with fatigue. "I thought it gone forever, and with it a piece of my family's heart." Her eyes, though grateful, held a shadow of the betrayal she'd felt, knowing a trusted servant had betrayed her. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her scarf. "It's a small thing, Lady Beatrice," she said modestly. "The bracelet was never far, only hidden by fear and desperation." The resolution of the theft had rippled through the household, and Miss Marple had spent the morning tying up loose ends. Inspector Hargreaves, now bustling with the satisfaction of a case closed, had returned to the hall to deliver the bracelet and finalize his report. Ellen Carter, under arrest, awaited her fate in the village lockup. Her confession a weight lifted, but a future uncertain. Miss Marple had suggested leniency to Hargreaves, her voice soft but firm. "A girl running from a violent man, Inspector, acts out of fear, not malice. A chance to reform might do more than a cell." Hargreaves had nodded, jotting a note, though his moustache twitched with the pragmatism of a man bound by law. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the others entangled in the mystery. Clara Langston, summoned to the drawing-room, entered with her usual poise, though her sapphire ring seemed to gleam less brightly today. "Aunt Beatrice, I'm so glad it's found," she said, her voice sincere but her eyes cautious, as if gauging her aunt's mood. Beatrice smiled, though her expression held a hint of reserve. "Thanks to Miss Marple, Clara. Though I confess, I wondered at times if your admiration for the bracelet went too far." Clara flushed, her chin lifting. "I'd never steal from you, Aunt. I only wanted to celebrate your joy in it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting Clara's. "Of course, my dear," she said kindly, "but ambition can make one curious, and curiosity can lead to questions, about diamonds perhaps, or their value." Clara's flush deepened, and she looked away, her fingers twisting her ring. Miss Marple recalled the vicar's mention of Clara's inquiries at Reed's shop, her interest in valuations more than a bride's whimsy. She's learned a lesson, Miss Marple thought, though she'll never admit it. Percival Reed arrived shortly after, his thin frame taut with relief as he inspected the bracelet at Beatrice's request. "The clasp is intact," he said, his spectacles glinting as he turned it in the light. "I told you, Lady Beatrice, my work is sound." His voice held a trace of defensiveness, and Miss Marple noted the way his hands trembled slightly, betraying the strain of recent days. "I'm grateful for your skill, Mr. Reed," Beatrice said, her tone gracious but cool, "and I trust your business will recover from its challenges." Reed's eyes flickered, but he nodded, offering to repair the clasp free of charge. As a gesture of goodwill, Miss Marple watched him closely, recalling the butcher's gossip about his debts, the ledger hidden in his shop. A man under pressure, she thought, might dream of a bracelet's worth, but Reed's pride kept him honest. Barely. She smiled at him, her expression disarming. "You've a fine reputation, mister." "Reed," she said, "it's a comfort to know the bracelet was in such capable hands." Reed's shoulders relaxed, though his smile was strained. "Thank you, Miss Marple," he said, and she sensed he was grateful to be cleared of suspicion, if not of his troubles. The village, too, buzzed with the news of the bracelet's recovery. At the tea shop, Mrs. Cleary recounted the tale to every customer, her voice a mix of awe and pride. Miss Marple saw it all along, she said, wiping down the counter. That Ellen sending it off to Whitechapel. Who'd have thought? Miss Marple, stopping by for a scone, listened with her usual serenity, her mind lingering on Ellen's confession. The scarred man, Tommy, remained a shadow in the story, and she wondered if Hargreaves would pursue him. A girl's fear, she thought, is a man's crime, and that's a case for another day. Back at Dolly Bantry's cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm against the evening's quiet. Dolly, bursting with questions, leaned forward. "Jane, you're a marvel. How did you know it was Ellen?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her smile was modest. "It was only a matter of watching, Dolly. A bruise, a letter, a nervous glance. They tell a story if you listen." She thought of Ellen's pale face, Clara's ambition, Reed's debts, Beatrice's carelessness, each a piece of the puzzle, now neatly fitted together. The bracelet, she said softly, was a mirror, reflecting what each person wanted. For Ellen, it was freedom. For Clara, perhaps a taste of grandeur. For Reed, a way out of debt. And for Beatrice, a link to her past. But it's the small things, those human frailties, that reveal the truth. Dolly shook her head, marvelling. "You make it sound so simple, Jane." Miss Marple's needles clicked on, her scarf nearing completion. "It is simple, my dear," she said. "People are never as mysterious as they think." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, where she'd soon return. The case was closed, the bracelet restored, but the story of Ellen's fear lingered, a reminder of the shadows that drive desperate acts. "Human nature," she murmured, "is the real mystery, and it's always the same." Her needles wove on, each stitch a testament to the quiet art of observation and the truth it could uncover. Chapter 12. A Quiet Reflection. The train to St. Mary Mead rattled gently through the countryside, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the events of the past week. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting bag nestled beside her. The familiar scarf now complete and folded neatly in her lap. The rolling hills, dappled with late summer green, passed in a blur. But her eyes were distant, her mind weaving through the threads of the mystery now resolved at Ashford Hall. The diamond bracelet, restored to Lady Beatrice, had left behind a trail of human frailties. Fear, ambition, pride, and desperation, each as telling as the gem itself. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, the familiar creak of her armchair a welcome return to routine. The village was quiet, its gossip already turning to newer scandals, though the tale of the bracelet lingered like a well-loved story. She lit a lamp, its soft glow illuminating the room, and drew out a fresh skein of wool, her fingers already itching to begin a new project. As she cast on, her thoughts returned to Ellen Carter, the maid whose fear had driven her to theft, and the scarred man, Tommy, whose shadow had loomed over her actions. Ellen's confession had unravelled the mystery, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the girl's pale face, her trembling hands, the bruise that spoke of a life marked by fear. A girl like that, she thought, reminds me of young Sarah in Saint. Mary Mead, who took a silver spoon to escape a cruel father. Fear makes thieves of us all, but it's the why that matters. She had spoken to Inspector Hargreaves before leaving, urging him to investigate Tommy, the man from Whitechapel. A girl's crime is one thing, she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, but a man's threats are another. You'll find the root of it in London, Inspector Hargreaves had nodded, promising to follow the lead, and Miss Marple trusted he would. Her thoughts turned to the others. Lady Beatrice, with her pride in the family heirloom, had been careless, her trust in her household blinding her to its vulnerabilities. Clara Langston, her ambition sharpened by a wealthy fiancé, had asked too many questions about diamonds, her curiosity a shadow of suspicion that Miss Marple had noted but dismissed. Percival Reed, weighed down by debts, had hovered on the edge of temptation, his knowledge of the bracelet's value a dangerous lure, yet his pride had held him back. Each of them, Miss Marple mused, saw the bracelet as something more, a symbol, a solution, a status. But it was Ellen's fear that turned thought into action. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead years ago, where a stolen brooch had revealed a web of village secrets, jealousy, debt, a hidden love. Human nature, she said softly, her needles clicking in the quiet, is like my knitting. The pattern seems simple, but it's the twists and turns that make it whole. The bracelet, like that brooch, had been a catalyst, exposing the frailties of those around it. Beatrice's carelessness had left it vulnerable. Clara's ambition had clouded judgment. Reed's debts had sparked doubt. And Ellen's desperation had sealed her fate. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the window, where the village slept under a crescent moon. She thought of the diamond in the gravel, a clever misdirection that had nearly fooled Hargreaves, and Ellen's letters to Whitechapel, a desperate bid for freedom. It's always the small things, she murmured, that tell the tale. A bruise, a letter, a nervous glance. They speak louder than words. She smiled faintly, her needles moving with the ease of long practice. The case had been solved, the bracelet returned, but the story of Ellen's fear lingered, a reminder that not all mysteries end with a jewel's recovery. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple reflected on the village itself, its whispers and watchful eyes. St. Mary Mead, like Ashford Hall, was a microcosm of human nature, its secrets as intricate as any grand estate. People think a village is simple, she thought, but it's a tapestry woven from the lives of those who live here. She recalled Mrs. Cleary's gossip, the butcher's tales, the vicar's observations, all had played their part, guiding her to the truth. Observation, she said softly, is a quiet art, but it shines a light on even the darkest corners. Her needles paused as she considered the future. Ellen, she hoped, would find mercy, perhaps a chance to start anew, far from Tommy's reach. Beatrice would guard her bracelet more closely, Clara would temper her ambition, and Reed would face his debts, perhaps with newfound caution. The bracelet, Miss Marple thought, was a mirror, reflecting what each wanted or feared. But it's the human heart that holds the real mystery. She rose, setting her knitting aside, and stepped to the window, gazing out at the sleeping village. The moon cast a silver glow over the rooftops, and Miss Marple's heart was light, though her mind was already turning to the next puzzle life might bring. A little observation, she murmured, and a touch of patience. It's all one needs to unravel the world. With a final glance at the stars, she turned back to her fire content in the knowledge that truth, like her knitting, always found its pattern in the end.